This is Condition Overload, the hands-down most broken mod in the entire game of Warframe. And I don't mean broken as in, oh, it is very, very strong. No, I mean it literally does not work properly. In fact, there's actually so much wrong with this that Condition Overload has two separate wiki entrances. One of them for the mod itself, where it explains how it works, and then a second full wiki page with all the exceptions and details and every single weapon in the game where this mod actually does not work the way that it is intended. And as you can see right here, it is quite a lot. It is a lot. So even though I already made a quick short briefly touching on the whole subject, in this video I want to take a couple more minutes to go more into detail as to what really is going on here. So welcome, and let's jump into the brokenness of Condition Overload. It's gonna be a fun ride. But before we get into all the quirks and details, let's first all get on the same page and go over how the whole Condition Overload mod is supposed to work in the first place. And look, I even brought out my Christmas Anaros for this video. Happy holidays, everybody! Now, first of all, a little disclaimer, whenever I say Condition Overload in this video, I don't only refer to the mod Condition Overload itself, but also to Galvanized Aptitude, Galvanized Savvy, Galvanized Shot, which literally do exactly the same thing as Condition Overload, just that they are for the other weapon types. Now, first and foremost, when we want to understand what's wrong with Condition Overload, we need to understand how damage calculation for weapons in Warframe works in general. For example, right here, I have a Bratton Prime, and we're going to take a look at how weapon modification works here. We have a total base damage of around about 100. And when I add multipliers, like Serration here, which gives me base damage, then the multipliers are multiplied on top of the base damage. So we have 100 base damage, we get 165% on top of that, so it multiplies 165% on top of 100, which leads to 265%. A little bit more here because it's 100.8, but you get the point, right? And the way that damage calculation in Warframe works is that different types of damage multipliers are multiplied with one another. So here we have Serration, that is a base damage multiplier. It's multiplied on top of the base damage. If we then go and take another type of multiplier, like elemental damage, and put that on top, then the elemental damage is multiplied on top of whatever we had here before. So what we see right here is we have 267 damage, and then we take 90% damage from cryo rounds, put it onto here, and as you see, it almost doubles the damage. Before that, we had 267, now we have 500. So the 90% is multiplied on top of the 267 here, basically doubling our damage output. And it works the same way for all different types of damage multipliers. For example, right here, Bane of Grenier, Bane of Corpus, these are faction damage mods, and they are also a separate multiplier. So if we add that right here, it doesn't change anything in the stats because the damage multiplier applies only on specific enemies. But what this would do is it would also multiply, as it also says on the mod, times 1.55. It multiplies this right here, 507, times 1.55. Now, why am I saying all of this? The reason is that because of the fact that different damage multipliers are all multiplicative to one another, what we usually try to do with our weapon builds is have as many different types of damage multipliers on our weapon as possible. For example, something that we wouldn't necessarily want to do is take Heavy Caliber and Serration on the same weapon. Both of them give 165% damage, but both of them are considered base damage. So as you can also see right here, we have a 500 damage right now, and if we put Heavy Caliber on, it's not going to take 165 and multiply that on top of the 507. It gets diminishing returns, right? And the reason is that this is base damage, and this is base damage, and if you have two mods of the same type, then the game is going to go and add them together first into one number. In this case, it takes 165 and 165, and then it says like, okay, you now get 330% base damage, and then it multiplies the 330% into here. That is why you get diminishing returns if you put multiple of the same mod type on a weapon. There are situations where it still makes sense, but in general, it is what we try to avoid. Now, you might be wondering, why is that important when we're talking about Condition Overload? Isn't this whole video about Condition Overload and how it is bugged? Why do you talk with us about modding weapons? Well, let's get into that right now. See, condition overload, or in this example, galvanized aptitude because we're talking about a rifle, you get 40% direct damage per status type affecting the target. Stacks up to 2 times, meaning if you get 2 kills, you get 80% direct damage per status effect. What that means is, if we briefly spawn in an enemy, what that means is, if I attack the enemy with the Braton like this, then I don't get any extra damage. However, if I put multiple different status types on the enemy, as you can also see right now, then for each and every one of those different symbols over the health bar, I would get a damage bonus against the enemy if I fire at them with the Braton. The reason why I don't get it right now is because I haven't stacked it up, because it needs skills to stack up, but we can quickly take the heavy gunner out. Now we have one of these stacks, you can see it in the top right corner, and if we then have another heavy gunner, and we apply all the different status effects to them, and then start shooting them, you will see how much more damage we all of a sudden start dealing against them. That is because we get the bonus damage from galvanized aptitude, and because there were so many different status types on the enemy. So yeah, this is how condition overload type mods are supposed to work. You get more damage based on how many status effects are on the enemies. And the important part here is that the damage bonus from the condition overload type mods is supposed to be, and I say this in very, very big parentheses here, supposed to be base damage. So this right here is supposed to work with serration the same way that heavy caliber would work with serration. So you would technically get diminishing returns if you get the damage from both of these on your weapon. However, this right now is where we finally get into why this mod system and mechanic is completely bugged, because as you can see right here, this is a list in the wiki of all the different weapons in the entire game where this is just not working the way it's supposed to. It's not a list of all the weapons telling you whether it works or not, no. This is only the list of all the weapons where it does not work the way, right? This is a list of the exceptions. It's not all the weapons, it's just the exceptions. And let's just dive into that so I can explain to you the madness that is condition overload. Now, when it comes to condition overload being bugged, then there are 5 main scenarios that can happen. Scenario 1, and this is the most simple one, is that the mod actually works exactly the same way as it is expected. It gives you the damage bonus that it says, and it also works as base damage. In this case, if that's how it performs with your weapon, then your weapon would not show up on this list here, because this list only lists the exceptions. The ones where it works, they don't show up here. For this scenario, everything is fine and we don't really need to say any more about it. Up next, we have scenario 2. In this case, condition overload is not additive to base damage as it's supposed to be, but actually multiplicative. So the game thinks that these two here are not both base damage, but instead the game thinks that condition overload is a completely independent individual damage multiplier. This is the quote-unquote best case scenario, because that means you get crazy more damage out of your weapon than you actually would, because you essentially create another type of damage multiplier that is multiplicative out of thin air, and that makes damage numbers much, much, much bigger. When we take a look into our weapon list right here, then we have a whole column in the table right here that says math/behavior type, and this one right here lists exactly what I mean. If it says adding, then this means it is additive, it is base damage, just like serration. But for every single weapon, where it says multiplying, it is exactly the case that we're just talking about, where it is multiplicative and actually giving you way more damage than it ever was supposed to do. And as you see, there are quite a lot of weapons. So let me show you a quick example of this. My favorite example to show multiplicative condition overload would be the Stalta. So what we have right here essentially is a standard Stalta build, and we use, of course, galvanized aptitude, and you will see a massive difference when we use the alt fire of the Stalta. First of all, this right here is how much damage it deals without the condition overload effect. Quite a lot, 266,000 on direct hit. Let's quickly stack it up to the maximum of 2, get a second kill. And now let's go. Let's go and put a lot of status effects on the heavy gunner. Let's try and do that again. So just to get that straight, right? We went to 23 million on an orange crit. Now, I know there are many factors on this build right here. For example, I think we've been stacking primary deadhead with the kills and everything, but what I'm trying to say here is, even if we factor all of the other things in, viral making the enemy weaker, corrosive armor stripping, this one being stacked up, I think it is pretty obvious that we wouldn't deal 10 times the damage if this one right here was just additive to Serration. If you don't believe me, just read in the wiki, it says it's multiplicative, do testing yourself. What I'm trying to show here is the crazy power of those weapons where condition overload is multiplicative. You can deal ridiculous numbers. It is a bug, it is not intentional, but it is a good bug. You know, we like big numbers. So yeah, these were case number 1, where it works normally, and number 2, where we are very happy because it is multiplicative and deals much more damage. However, there is also the polar opposite, where it just doesn't work at all. Where it just literally doesn't work at all. Now, let's quickly take a look at the wiki here. In the table, fortunately, there are not a lot of weapons where it doesn't work. But for example, for the Coda Basis' alt-fire with the homing projectiles, it says NA, it does not apply, and that is usually the case for weapon types where they're dealing AoE damage, because the way that these mods are supposed to work is that they only really apply to direct damage, not to AoEs. Also here, the Evensong, we have a charged radial AoE attack where it does not work. And this is sort of a reoccurring theme, you know, you have the Vidaria Prime with the AoE where it doesn't work. Or if we scroll into the pistols, we have Hildren's exalted weapons, the Balefire Charger, which also deal AoE damage, and it does not work there. So basically, what we're saying here is that if your weapon deals AoE damage, or a portion of your weapon's damage is AoE, then definitely double check the list in the wiki, because for a lot of AoE weapons in the game, the damage bonus from condition overload type mods just does not apply. So yeah, these would be the first 3 cases, but of course I've saved the best for last, so now let's talk about case number 4 and 5, and these ones, they're just absolutely ridiculous, because you would never expect that this can actually be a thing. So yeah, we basically established that Galvanized Aptitude or Condition Overload mod types, they give you a damage bonus, in this case a maximum of 80% per status type. This can either be additive to Serration, the way it's supposed to be, or multiplicative to Serration, the way that we would like it to be, or it does not work at all with Serration, mostly on AoE weapons. But what if I told you that you cannot even trust the figures on the mod itself? That's true, even though it says plus 40% right here, or plus 80%, this is not true for many weapons in the game, because this mod here is terribly bad at actually reading what the numbers say right here on the left. Let me show you in the wiki. Now, in the table in the wiki right here, we have 3 columns. One says attack unmodded damage, which is the damage that you would deal with the weapon unmodded against the enemy. However, the second one shows you which damage the Condition Overload mod actually thinks is the base damage, because for some weapons it just doesn't read the numbers right. So there are situations, for example, one of my personal favorites is, is right here, the Mutilist Cernos, okay? The Mutilist Cernos has a Toxin AoE Cloud that it deals, and this Toxin AoE Cloud deals 5 damage. I haven't really tested it, I'm just gonna believe the wiki right here. However, the Condition Overload mod should then go and add its 40, 80, or how many ever percent damage based on this base value right here. But that's not the case, because in this case for the Mutilist Cernos, Galvanized Aptitude actually thinks that the base damage value of the AoE Cloud is 205, not 5, so when it applies its damage bonus, the damage bonus is based on this as a base, which leads to a 4,100% damage increase compared to what it is actually supposed to be. That's crazy. That would be the 4th case, and the 5th case is then the unfortunate other part where the mod just thinks that the base damage is lower than it actually is. Also on the Mutilist Cernos, if you deal a direct charge attack, you deal 410 damage according to the wiki, but also here the mod thinks the base damage is just 205, so you kind of only get 50% of the value out of it. Now, this was quite the long discussion, so let's quickly sum up what all of this means for you. See, the first step that you gotta take when modding any weapon in the game is go to the wiki page and see whether your weapon of choice is even listed there. If it's not listed, then congratulations, you can actually trust the mod and it works the way it's supposed to. However, if your weapon is listed there, then you kind of sort of make adjustments based on what it says there. If it says that the mod does not work at all, well, then you might just not want to use it. If it says that the mod is multiplicative, then you want to make sure that you have A, base damage on the weapon, and in addition to that, also use condition overload, because if it is multiplicative, as we figured out with the Stalta, you can get crazy damage out of it. And then for all the cases like the Mutalised Cernos right here, where it is additive the way it's supposed to, but misreads the weapon statistics and either applies more or less damage based on that, you gotta decide for yourself, right? If you wanted to use the Mutalised Cernos for the AoE cloud, you probably want to have the mod for the sweet, juicy 4000% edition. But if you want to do Mutalised Cernos with direct hits, then you might not want to do that because you don't get that much out of it. Long story short, before you mod a weapon, check the wiki so you know how to deal with the whole condition overload stuff. Hope you liked the video, see you next time, again, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and good loot!